We're on to item 11, unfinished business, Community Law Enforcement Partnership Commission. Why don't we just take this in conjunction with item 2 on the addendum so that we just take care of both of these items at the same time? Comments from the board? Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, as I said last time when we considered this at the on the Club C, part of the reason I put together that the suggestions on that is really to have a different point or a starting point for discussions about trying to create something or modify something that going forward actually works. At this point, I would suggest that item number 2 on the addendum is probably a better way to go, as it looks like that one actually gets us to the goal that we had originally talked about getting in terms of policy with the Sheriff's Department, as opposed to just being one of grants. Plus, I think it's probably got greater support as well. And I believe if Chief Stuckey will confirm that the sheriff is in support of item number 2 as well. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Can Chief Stuckey confirm?
Do you want to do that?
Chairman Elias and Board of Supervisors members, yes, the sheriff would be in support of that action.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, Mr. Christie, please.
would it be appropriate to make a motion on item number 11, that the motion be to dissolve the Community Law Enforcement Partnership Commission?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Christie, if we adopt number 2, it automatically does away with Club C.
Is that, I'm not sure that it does. Clarification from council?
I'm not sure that it does either. Counsel, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I don't think that anything in the agenda item for addendum item 2 would call necessarily for abolition of the Club C, but that could be done at a later date via a separate agenda item
Or it
if
could
that
be
item
done now
passes.
because we have it advertised. Not in the addendum, on the regular.
Well, the regular agenda item involves discussion, direction, action regarding effective operation of the Club C. I'm not sure that would give public notice that the Club C might be abolished.
My second question would be, is my motion appropriate and can it be made?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, I think given the way these 2 agenda items are written, I guess I would be a little conservative in answering that and say that it would probably be better if there were an agenda item to dissolve it.
That would require someone who had voted in favor of it to reintroduce it again?
No, anybody can.
Mr.
Last
Chairman,
time we heard differently from you, Counsel, please.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Christie, there had been a previous item, and I can't remember when it was, to disband the Club C, and that item failed. My opinion on that was that if that item were to be reintroduced, it would either have to be done consistently with the board's rules on reconsideration, or the board would have to suspend the rules. If there were if the board were to adopt agenda item or addendum item 2, for example, and create a new body, I would view that as a changed circumstance, and therefore there could be a separate item to disband the Club C. It wouldn't be a reconsideration of the prior item, it would be a new item.
what we could do is, Mr. Chairman, Council, is we could have 2 separate motions. One to place the dissolution of the Club C in the next board agenda, and a separate motion to adopt item number 2 on the addendum, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Valadez, yes.
So are you making a motion to dissolve Club C and put it on the next agenda?
I am.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second to put the dissolution of Club C on the agenda for our next meeting. Discussion? Objections? One noted for the chair. Very good. Motion carries 4-1. I have some concerns about item 2 on the addendum, because I think that this is just not good for the public and not good for the sheriff's office in any way, shape, or form. The truth is that this is being rammed through without any public input, without any public dialogue. We had 14 meetings about Tobacco 21. 14 meetings and none about a commission that would review law enforcement. Not good, not right. The recommendation to have closed door recommendations from this group does not create an image of trust, does not create any transparency and inclusion for the community. In fact, it removes community participation from this. I don't even want to call it a commission. It takes community out of the equation completely. Failure to have the commission follow the open meeting law does the same thing. It erodes public opinion about the transparency of the sheriff's office, and really works in complete contrary. It's completely contrary to proper decorum when we're talking about having a review of law enforcement activities and behavior. The agenda could be compiled just as easy by and shared by the sheriff and the commission members, just like the Board of Health does with their agenda. It's not a problem. It's a healthy thing. We hear from community, and then we hear from the department as well at the same time. The other thing I think that we're really fortunate to have, and this is why I think we should hold off a bit, is we have actually an expert who lives here in Tucson, who works for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, based here in Tucson, and was very willing to help work in a community process to help us come up with a commission that would work good for the sheriff's office and for the public. I'm not saying that the board should have any kind of power over this. This has to come from the sheriff, but it has to be from a position of taking into account community concerns in public and having them discussed in public. This is how we stay away from the kind of tragedies that have hit the community of Mesa, the community of Phoenix, and they've had to struggle to put together a commission in a very, very dangerous time, you know, because terrible things have happened in those communities as a result. And the public deserves to have good answers, fair answers, and deserves to have a transparent process that takes a look at things. This is how we do things in America in 2019. So I just hope that the sheriff would take some of this into consideration, regardless of what happens in this vote, because ultimately we don't really have, you know, that much authority to tell the sheriff what to do with his commission. But I hope the sheriff would put together something that follows the open meeting law, that has transparency, that allows community to participate, that allows us to have the kind of input that's meaningful in bringing peace to our community, in bringing a set of faith for all of us to work together on making law enforcement better for our community. We all support the sheriff's office. We all support the men and women of the sheriff's office. You know, we honor the work you do every day. I do. I know everyone else on this board does as well, and our correction officers too, because they have a very difficult job too. But to leave community out, so they have no input, so meetings are held in secret, so we don't even know what's discussed, this does nothing to help us. I think we need to move in a different kind of direction, and I would hope that the sheriff, despite this vote or whatever happens in this vote, would move in that direction on his own, and that the community would help him make those decisions together through a series of public meetings that would include input from everybody in all segments of our community. That's really the smart, proper, caring way to move forward on items like this. Not in secrecy, not behind closed doors, not with an agenda set with only the sheriff having input. That's not community. That's not transparency. That's not fairness. So anyways, just some comments that I think it's very important to make, and we shouldn't ram this through without some kind of community process being a part of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Miller, please.
I don't see anything on here that says it's a secret commission. I believe any commission that they have for the sheriff department would have to be publicly held and have open meeting law application.
This is that would not be subject to the Arizona open meeting laws.
Okay.
And that
Okay.
The sheriff is not bound to follow advice or direction of the commission.
Got it.
And it says that you can kick somebody off the commission if you think they're obstructing them. All of those things are kind of contrary to what we're discussing. There's no transparency here.
Okay, and then I agree with you on that. I missed that on this when I was sitting here because but I'll tell you the issue that I have is that, you know, as you said, you support law enforcement, but that isn't what happened with this commission. Someone wrote on Facebook the other day, pulled a quote from one of my fellow supervisors. Your habits will determine your future, and if you keep doing things a certain way, you'll be able to predict the results. And I believe, as previously, this became a platform for law enforcement bashing, for vilifying our law enforcement, for calling people racists. We heard it week after week here in the boardroom. And as I have predicted, you know, our effort to politicize public safety would turn the community upside down, and it did, and it created more division and confusion. The creation of that commission has been nothing more than a political stunt intended to diffuse responsibility for the funding decisions that belong solely to the duly elected sheriff applying for them, and then it is his obligation to submit the request for approval of the funding he deems necessary. That is our responsibility, to approve or not to approve. The approval of the board has always in the past been strictly ministerial. For years, the county accepted those Stone Garden funds, and then now it's that ministerial function has been weaponized. Well, some members of the board believe that the commission serves another purpose. The evidence does not support that belief. We saw what was happening. You can go look at the videos on my website and see what was happening in those meetings. It was a waste of people's time. It was divisive. It was insulting to the sheriff's deputies, to law enforcement in general. And now since I pulled my representatives from there, somewhere in law enforcement, it was so abusive in those meetings. And now we're hearing there's not a quorum being formed. Well, guess what? I guess since that political platform, that agenda, is no longer being allowed to be carried out, people have kind of lost interest in attending, the members that used to attend. So I know there's accusations here that supervisors are pulling, I officially pulled mine off and said no more. Others still have members assigned. You can't get a quorum with those 4 supervisor appointees. So I just question their motivations altogether. Why aren't they showing up anymore? And in other cases, I've been told that they opted not to attend anymore because they aren't able to do what they used to do, which was grandstand and make broad brush statements about racism in the sheriff's department. And as county administrator noted in a recent memorandum, Sheriff Napier has shown an incredible willingness to work with the commission. At the same time, the commissioners have been unwilling to work with him. Whatever, if any, commission or advisory board is formed, it should involve the sheriff's office only. And I think Sheriff Napier is supportive. If he wants to have input from the residents, I personally hear from constituents daily. I listen carefully and give consideration to whatever they have to say whenever they call me. And I think the sheriff is very capable and very willing to work with any residents that want to attend or speak to him, not just a commission, but if you want to form a commission, form a commission. But I think that these items that Supervisor Elias brought up about not being subject to open meeting law, I think that's wrong. I think that should be stricken out of here, if that's possible. I think that if we don't take that language out, and I would like to know, what is the purpose of removing it from the open meeting law? Is anyone willing to address that? Or was it just a save?
Mr. Huckelberry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, in discussing this matter with the sheriff, he felt the advisory group would be fairly high level in the policing philosophy. In other words, the issues that really are pretty complex and difficult to deal with, including profiling and the rest, and that it would not be a group that would determine the appropriateness of grants or anything else that we've done in the past. And therefore, obviously appointed by the board, one of the fine lines was that if in fact it is appointed by the board and is not subject to open meeting law, they cannot discuss any item that can come before the board in a subsequent meeting that may involve the sheriff's department. So that would be grants. I think it's probably perfectly fine if the board so chooses to make it subject to the open meeting law, and all that does is put the administrative burden of notice and minutes on the sheriff.
It does more than that, I think. It's about public access to information. And I'm sorry that these are controversial issues. I really am. I regret that, but they are. And it's not just, it's not in any way endemic to Pima County. This is happening all over the country. This is happening all over the state. We can't afford to just hide and not be responsive. It's wrong. It's sad that we ultimately face these difficult questions, but they're very real, and people's feelings are very real, and they deserve to be heard, no matter how painful they are.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Christie, please.
In your opening statements a moment ago, you drew the reference or the analogy about the Tobacco 21 and how that had a number of public hearings and numerous public venues to discuss this. And I know why you were doing that, and I understand that, but I have to point out that that's not apples to apples. It's certainly not an accurate analogy, because that issue is something that is of an ordinance that is generated by this board. The Sheriff's Department is fully elected body that has its own control that comes from the voters, not the Board of Supervisors, other than budgetary items. So to put it on the same level is not an accurate analogy with the Board of Supervisors as an equal with the Sheriff's Department. I've been a full-throated supporter of Operation Stone Garden Grants acceptance for a couple of years now. I have supported the sheriff in all of his efforts to try to reach out, and I even work with the CLEP-C on those various issues. I agree completely with the points that Supervisor Miller just momentarily ago brought out and underlined and underscored. In this particular case, as much of a supporter as I am of the Sheriff's Department and Sheriff Napier, I'm going to kick it back to the Sheriff's Department. And by doing so, I'm going to say, if the Sheriff's Department wants a community advisory committee, then let the sheriff form it, let the sheriff administrate it, and let the sheriff, if he so chooses, report to the community about any kind of findings. He's asked, I think in several instances, and I believe it's in this recommendation as well, that the Board of Supervisors appoint members to that. That is going down that slippery slope that we just have tried to crawl back up from, which is politicizing the Sheriff's Department and its grants and its function. There are many, many models across the country of law enforcement advisory commissions, and I know the sheriff has access to them and the ability to glean from dozens, if not hundreds, of examples. Certainly he can find an example where there is a unbiased, professional way of finding members, and it's important that the sheriff find his own members to that organization, because if there's any connection between that Sheriff's Advisory Commission and this Board of Supervisors, we're right back where we started from, and that's the politicization, the weaponization of the Sheriff's Department and oversight, and providing soapboxes that will just fester and create more open wounds. The sheriff is capable of finding his own members and administrating his own commission, and it should be up to him to do so, and not from any direction, interference, or insistence from the Board of Supervisors.
I would just comment that one of the great traditions that we have in our country is the notion of public meetings and public hearings and town halls. And they began in the humble beginnings of America, right prior to the Revolution, and they continue today. I think it's a model that's good. I think we should be able to talk about any subject in public related to government with input from every member of our society, whether they're citizens or not.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Valadez.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and try a motion. I'm going to move that we approve item number 2, deleting item number 2, that is the item that you were speaking about, which reads number 2, the commission would not be subject to the open meeting laws, and hence cannot discuss or take action on matters that will come before the Board of Supervisors. I am striking that language.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion. I would just comment that I would really like to be able to vote in favor of your motion, Supervisor Valadez, but I'm not, because this has been put together absent any public comment. Not a single meeting for people to have the opportunity to have their voices heard.
Mr. Chairman, could I have a question answered?
Of course.
Is the motion currently on the floor to simply strike that number 2, but to go ahead and approve it without number 2? Okay. With number 2 or without number 2, I will be voting against this commission in total for the reasons I just outlined earlier, that this should be completely sole and separate from the Sheriff's Department. If he wants a commission, it should be up to him to generate one and have absolutely no connection to this board or any facilitation of it through any kind of recommendations like this number 2 on the agenda items indicate.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Supervisor Bronson?
No.
Supervisor Christie?
No.
Supervisor Miller?
No.
Supervisor Valadez?
Aye.
Chairman Elias?
No. Motion fails 4-1.